think leadership gets a bad rep in Africa, and there are great leaders. I think we sometimes forget to look at the great leaders as well as the, unfortunately, possibly too many that we don't emulate towards. Like, let's invest. Let's make sure we invest in people. We need infrastructure. We need critical needs resources, but let's also invest in the people. I think there's huge amounts of progress and development that could, I don't think we're there yet, I don't think Africa's yet taking advantage of it, but could be a catalyst for real growth and development in Africa if we were really to take this seriously and to have governments, non-profits, but particularly corporates, investing in developing AI and tech in Africa, for Africa, as an example towards growth. Citizens in various countries in Africa, a number of people are frustrated, but there's also hope. And I think I'm always inspired and encouraged actually by how young people, and people, anyone, but especially young people, often have more hope.
You work with young people.
Indeed.
And you're trying to make leader out of them.
Yeah.
How is that challenging for you?
Sure. Well, I'll take you back. I think a lot of the young people we work with, I think a lot of young people in the world are leaders already, but they have limited opportunity sometimes and limited support in terms of using that agency, in terms of using that leadership, particularly in the ways they want to and the ways we need them to. So I think the challenge isn't so much making them leaders, but the challenge is trying to expand our potential to support them to harness their natural leadership.
How does that work? Like, what do you do to make that happen?
Our key sort of flagship program is a fellowship program. So we have sometimes thousands of applications, sometimes for 50 places in a country. And if you get into the fellowship program, very meritocratic, very competitive, then you go through a 1 to 2 year fellowship and cohort. And in that time, from day one, you're placed in a job, in a role, typically in a ministry, because we partner with government, civil service, as well as other public.
They don't get to have any trainings before?
It's alongside.
Like, or training on the job, yeah?
Yes, but it's training on the job as well. So, as well as we do a lot of, we do trainings, they have mentors as well as supervisors, they go on community visits, they get to really make sure they're really well connected to the communities they're serving. We do performance reviews, and even once they graduate, we keep close to them as the alumni, supporting them, connecting them with each other, adding on trainings, opportunities, webinars. So the way we tackle this is trying to have opportunities for these young people that often say, I've always wanted to serve my country, I just didn't know how, or I've always wanted to work in the public sector, but I didn't know anyone who could help me get there. And because we're meritocratic, because we're so thorough, we get these amazing young people who are just ready for the challenge, and then we train them, support them to continue and to grow to be ethical and capable leaders.
In which African countries do you work with these leaders?
We started in Liberia just over 15 years ago. We're co-founded by Madame President Sirleaf. She was the president at the time. She historically looked around and said, but where are the young people? Where are the women? You know, if I want to rebuild this country after the decades of instability, I need young people to be a huge part of that. So we set up PYPP in Liberia to have these cohorts, these young people who are being, who we're growing and supporting to be the amazing leaders that they are. We then grew to Ghana, to Kenya, then to Malawi, and most recently Sierra Leone, which started this year. We're hoping to keep expanding.
That's fascinating.
Indeed.
What do you do then personally in helping these young people, especially the women that you mentioned there?
Yeah, so women is a really important to us. We're really focusing and harnessing in on some of the underrepresented groups, especially in leadership. So women is particularly both a personal and our organisational focus. Our incredible main partners, MasterCard Foundation, for example, with them we are aiming to have 70% of our fellows be women. We've been growing that number, we're now at 52%, but we're still getting higher. We're even exploring ideas of maybe having some women-only cohorts, and we're also looking at some of the barriers So we're not just recruiting women, but we're saying, well, what stops women getting these opportunities? What kind of support do they need when they're in work to make sure that there's a fair playing ground and that they can get to the positions where they can be most effective. So women in leadership is a key focus of ours, as well as some of the other underrepresented groups like people living with disabilities, IDP communities, and the like.
That's much fascinating. When you talk about leadership in the African continent, mostly people say we don't have leaders. We only have. They have all sort of terms for managers, corrupt politicians, whatever. But how do you try to change this mindset of, for especially these young folks that you're focused on in the continent, to not copy what they are seeing, but rather, because mostly it's about ethics. Being a leader is mostly about ethics.
Yes, so much.
And how do you try to make these young people different from the current crop of leaders you have across Africa?
Yeah, really good. I mean, I will say, I think, leadership gets a bad rep in Africa, and there are great leaders. I think we sometimes forget to look at the great leaders as well as the, unfortunately, possibly too many that we don't emulate towards. I think part of it starts even before the fact that it's really important to us that in our recruitment that we're giving opportunities to those who may not have had opportunities, because in doing that, part of our selection process looks at the ethics and the motivation. We may get a great young person, who's got a great resume, if you like, or just for whatever reason shines, but perhaps they don't have the motivation to serve their country.
How do you know that? How do you tell that they don't have it?
So as well as applying, and then there's a shortlisting, there's a very thorough recruitment process. There's also interviews. So, our fellows come in, and one of the sort of reasons why they might be one of the 50 out of 5,000 applicants is a real heart to serve their country. If someone comes along saying, "Oh, I want to make lots of money. I want to be famous. I want to be," that isn't. Those aren't the qualities we're looking for in our fellows. So that's part of it. But then I think even for the most ethical, most servant-hearted fellow or young person in any situation, especially when they get into leadership, it's very hard to stay that way. So within our training, we have key focus areas and times around ethics. Mentors, we do training with our mentors and supervisors, and they're there to support and to add sort of quality in terms of ethics. One of the things I've noticed is that our fellows and alumni often talk about the peer support being really important, because the reality is, in many contexts, is that young people will be faced with real challenges of ethics. So even if, I've heard alumni say, I came across a situation and I thought, well, I know from my fellowship that I need to remain ethical and what that means, what that looks like. But what do I do, especially if I'm more junior and I'm being challenged by someone senior to do something I believe is unethical? And sometimes we can come up now with some really obvious answers of what they should and shouldn't do, but actually the nuances mean that when they have peers and elders to be able to say, what do I do? Maybe alumni who are more senior than them, and they can tell them not just don't do the unethical thing, but processes, ways to communicate, how to make sure it's not just you saying, no, I'm not going to do that, but how, for example, a lot of our fellows and alumni have put in systems which in themselves have reduced corruption. So it's important as individuals that we and our fellows remain, ethical and don't succumb to corruption, but it's something bigger than that. I'll say it's amazing, and we love that we give these opportunities we're talking about to these young people that might not have the same opportunity to be given this role of responsibility to grow in their career with our support. So there's the impact on them as an individual, which is amazing, but there's this other huge impact that our work has as well, and that's in the systems change, right? It's what they do in their positions that's going to affect them, their departments, their ministries, their countries, the things they put in place. again, with us always supporting them along their journey. So I bring that up as an example of there's systems that have been put in place by some of our fellows. For example, bringing in systems around expenses, saying, why don't we automate this? Why are we doing paper? We should submit our expenses online. And then that's hugely reduced that department's expenses claims, because now if someone was tempted to have a false claim, they can't. So it's about them being ethical, but them also having a real mind to try and reduce any kind of corruption or negative practices.
What about this dilemma, though, that some of these young leaders face, that you work for a government that pays you or doesn't pay you, but you have to make a living, you have a family to take care of. What do you do if someone is interested in something? Let's say you are a building commissioner and they want approval for whatever, and you know, obviously what they're doing is not right, but you have to give them the permission because they're giving you a lot of money for it, and the position that you have for the government or government agency doesn't pay you. What do you do in that situation?
No, it's really hard, and this is why it's really exciting to see where countries are reforming their systems. So trying to bring in both the kind of things I said in terms of systems that reduce corruption, so you can't easily do that, which is all too easy in many places, but also are supporting their staff properly, are paying them a wage. But you know, there's a lot of sacrifice that our fellows and any young person wanting to serve their country or their communities give up. It's not always the most, in some countries, you know, it's more so, but it's not always the most lucrative role, you know. And so on the one hand, we try and, you know, build that strength and that grit and that resilience in the young people to be able to say no when it's really easy, and would you know, be beneficial to them as individuals if they said yes to that cut. But we also, things like our trainings and again that peer support, when that situation comes up, can be very useful. I've heard of alumni saying, oh, I contacted one of the other more senior alumni and said, what do I do in this situation? And again, the advice can be nuanced, but more helpful than just us saying, just say no. You know, it could be, well, actually, why don't you put them through the full process so you don't have to be the one that takes the money. That way, they won't have an opportunity to offer you that side, you know, that side bit. Again, put in a process as well so that next time, because of the process and different people looking at that payment, for just as an example you gave, enough hands are on it, enough eyes are looking at it, that it's not just you or your, you know, or another public servant that decides, how much shall I take? You know, there's again, it's around their personal ethics that we try and encourage, but also helping them to increasingly reform and improve systems to help with that area.
You work with young people, and but young Africans are very frustrated. They're very frustrated about the lack of development. They're very frustrated about the level of corruption, frustrated about politics and power. My question is basically, where is the continent at? Why are we in a situation where, you know, development is not working?
Well, I think there's a few things that I could unpack with what you said. I mean, starting with the first point, I think young people and citizens in various countries in Africa, a number of people are frustrated, but there's also hope. And I think I'm always inspired and encouraged, actually, by how young people, and people, anyone, but especially young people, often have more hope. You know, they're less tired. They're less, it has to be the way it is because that's the way it's been. I find that young people are actually really inspiring. They're actually very forward-thinking, and they have the energy, and it's one of the reasons why they need to be in leadership now, as well as Africa being a young continent. There's energy with youth.
There is energy. There are solutions.
Hope. Yeah.
They are very hopeful, as you mentioned.
Yes, yeah.
But they are not getting the support. They're not getting the finances.
Yeah, and we need much more of that. I mean, that's why we do what we do. That's why other incredible fellowship programs like Global Health Corps or Core Africa that put young people in remote settings like villages to help to encourage them and give them the tools to kind of make change. There our focus is public service and public sector, and particularly civil servants, but there are there are so many, that was just to name a few, kind of fellowship programs like this that actually focus on, I'm part of something called People First, and it's around, and we've now got 400 members, started with just a handful of us, around those organisations working around people first. Like, let's make sure we invest in people. We need infrastructure, we need critical needs resources, but let's also invest in the people. And that's, the kind of thing that we and many others do around supporting them. But I absolutely 100% agree. It's not enough. We need more. we need. There's multifaceted answers, but one of the answers to developing the continent is investing in young people and investing in programs like ours and those I mentioned that are actively walking alongside young people to help them be. We often talk about capable, ethical young leaders, and we need more of it.
How do you think then, the continent could utilize its resources at the moment, like what is present and what is being talked about, like, reducing capital flow or rearranging or basically overhauling the whole remittance system in actually bringing more money. But how do you think, if there is any idea in this direction, that the resources that we have right now could be utilized and develop more young people, and not just put them in leadership position, but also put them into businesses, educate them, and give them perspective?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, our main partner, who I mentioned, MasterCard Foundation, have big and inspiring aims around increasing employment for young people on the continent, and I think they and others in the non-profit space are one of, I often think of the sort of three main players, and you mentioned some of them. So there's a non-profit space, and there's people like MasterCard Foundation and organisations like that who are still, even in the current situation we find ourselves, who are still willing to really invest big on youth employment and creating jobs and youth leadership. But that space is looking different because ourselves and others in the similar space have lost a lot of funding with, what some are dubbing sort of end of big aid, and obviously we have seen aid from Western countries reduce. We all know that. So it is going to have to look different. There's less money now coming in to Africa for very many projects, including some of the ones we've mentioned. I encourage those who are still giving, often private philanthropy, foundations, to think about that people first element, to think about investing in leadership in people as well as infrastructure or projects, because we need the people to run it. And if we'd invested more in the people and leadership, then this situation would be would feel a bit less heavy. We've done that, but in not enough, as you mentioned, not enough, and which makes it heavier. So some of our alumni across our countries, for example, in Liberia, they've lost a lot of sort of nationally they've lost a lot of funding, using some of their skills that we've imparted in them and their experience in public service to help fill the gap. I mean, nothing can fill it financially fully, but putting in emergency and critical services in the gap because of building them up as ethical, capable young leaders. But that's mentioning just the non-profit side, and I just moved into some of our fellows, which, for example, in Liberia, they're all in civil service. So the other key pillar is government. We can't do development. We also can't do business well without government, without policies, without both soft and hard infrastructure. So that's why we focus on having young people, like I say, in public service more broadly, but our key focus is around civil service. We sometimes say it's the secret sauce. It makes everything else work. And then, of course, the third, which you touched on, is the private sector. And I think that's something that we need to be all working together, and no one of those three parties, I think, should ignore the other. And so even when thinking about development, there's been some sessions on venture capital. We sometimes, people talk about impact investment. I've been to two sessions around AI, which is predominantly, not only private sector, has been driven by the private corporate sector. I think there's huge amounts of progress and development that could, I don't think we're there yet, I don't think Africa's yet taking advantage of it, but could be a catalyst for real growth and development in Africa if we were really to take this seriously and to have governments, non-profits, but particularly corporates, investing in developing AI and tech in Africa, for Africa, as an example towards growth.
Do you think this future development strategy, like using AI, is inclusive enough to include women? African women are excluded in a lot of things. Like, we have cultures and traditions. Like, my sisters didn't go to school. Why? Because culture said they were not supposed to go to school.
Yeah.
How do you think this can be made like inclusive?
I think there's a general, like I said, I don't think enough is happening across the continent yet in terms of us taking opportunities such as AI and really making them our own and making them productive. And then your specific question around, for example, women taking, having opportunities. I mean, I think there's a number of things. There's things around education, opportunities for girls from a young age, which has been lacking, and you know, in some settings improving, and that's important. But the thing is, so there's the education piece, there's the training piece, and there are organisations trying to work on that. I think it's really important. The thing that excites me about something like AI is that in some ways it can transcend some of the many years, decades of barriers that we've had, say, as Africa, with often less resources or access to technology as women. And there are some barriers that are still there, but if they disappeared, it would actually sort of crumble many decades of some levels of inequality. So just an example, you know, there's still barriers around the infrastructure of access to internet, around the cost of data. Right? I mean, actual mobile usage in Africa is relatively high, considering sometimes the income of the person higher than in some other regions around the world. But can someone access free or affordable data? Can they get to the internet? I think if we can solve some of those problems, that will be a start. And then actually, yes, training around AI, but you know, once you have internet and a smartphone, there's a lot you can do. You know, I get excited thinking about what about that entrepreneurial woman who's got a business, but actually through AI or through the internet could learn how to maximize her profits. She could put her accounts online when maybe she didn't do that before. We already have things developed in Africa for Africa like M-Pesa, which grew. And so, you know, like finance and banking is now kind of opening up and changing to be relevant to that African woman who might be selling something on the street to become a businesswoman that can maybe make more money. You know, I've had discussions around AI, around language. That's another barrier, as well as data and internet, is language. That we don't have AI, for example, in enough languages. It doesn't recognize certain accents, even in English, as well as it understands others, because Africa hasn't fed in enough data, and because we don't have enough African-led initiatives that are going to be driving what comes out of AI. And I hope that our fellows and other leaders, young and old, in governments and in corporations, and in the development world and the not-for-profit sector will be able to come together and do more around investing in AI and technology that grows out of Africa for Africa. And I think if we do that well enough, and I don't think we're there yet, I don't think it's quite in place, things need to still change. I think if we get there, it would actually take down a lot of barriers, because if it's in any local language, if we train it so it can, be used by a rural woman with a dialect and language that isn't well known, and she can access some sort of information, or she can use a tool, or she can find a market that she didn't have. That's transformative. Yeah. If it's made for her and it's accessible for her, but we're far off because even things like internet and data, let alone language models, aren't quite there yet.
Do you think young Africans get it, what it takes to be a good leader?
Very good question. Well, I think I'd even question the sort of term young Africans. I think we sometimes when we need big solutions, we sometimes kind of have big categories. I mean, we are a very young continent, but we're also very diverse. So I think a young person, even within the same country, I'm from Uganda, and even within our country, there's a lot of diversity, both in terms of tribes, but also and language, but also even in terms of where people live, the education they've received, who they are, their values. So I just caution against saying, young people in Africa. I think it varies, but I think that one thing we do know, we often say that young people are the future, and I totally agree with statements that are now saying, no, actually, young people are now. And I mean, I've said that for decades, but now with the increasingly high demographics of young people in Africa, it really is true. Like, Africa is young, right? So, and that's true in Uganda, it's true in all the countries I work in and have worked in dozens of countries across Africa. It's a young, they tend to be young countries, and it's a young continent. But I find hope in that. I find hope because, with young people we can also have a young perspective and continue to grow and move forward.
I find myself sometimes in this circle of young graduates, like graduates from law schools, young lawyers, young economists, ministers, politicians, and I ask myself, what are they talking about? Because often the conversation is about the new houses, it's about the new cars, it's about their travels overseas. It's not about, how they refused a bribe, or it is not about how what they did in order to secure a loan or in order to secure money to build a road or build anything, something of development for their local, giving back to their community. And this is why I was asking you if you think that from your experience across the different African places, African cities, that if you met your people where you think that they really get it, what it takes to become a good leader.
Yes, I do. I definitely do. I mean, I've worked with young people in different forms and different ways for decades. I mean, even with emerging public leaders, it's hard to turn away the many hundreds and thousands that want to do the fellowship, that come with a real drive, the real hope. They I want to serve, even just that word serve, we hear that a lot. I want to serve my country, but I didn't know anyone. That's something we hear because of both real and imagined, but often, unfortunately, real ideas of nepotism and how you get roles with leadership and power, and how they're going to then use the power. So, we do see many young people that want to serve, and I think that the reason why I highlight that word is it's different from the example you're talking about. So yes, I do see that, and it inspires and encourages me, and I've seen that in different kinds of work, and I see that in the public sector as well as in corporate and in development, and just on the street, just the young people I speak to. I'm amazed by what I see. I do see hope, but I think it's a multi-layered, multifaceted thing as well, because it's not a simple answer. And I do think things like systemic poverty and historical inequalities all affect this as well, because you mentioned an example before about someone maybe being offered a bribe. If you don't have food to feed your family, then that becomes more tempting than if you're doing well. You have everything you need, and everyone in your community, which I think is not true for many of us. It's not true for me. I have many people in my wider community who I could help, and I want to help. So I think few of us could say, oh yeah, everyone I know is fine. At least maybe there are some countries in the world, but at least in Africa, it's rare to find someone who could say, no, everyone I know and my wider community and where I grew up, even if I looked around, there's no one suffering from poverty, from economic poverty. And that's a real challenge, because then when they do succeed, they may be looking at success in a very individual way of, what do I have? Now I have that car. Now I've taken, and then they're talking about that either just to celebrate it, or possibly at worst to boast about it, because that's what that's what they've been aiming for. But I think we need to reframe it, with our children and with young people, around what success really looks like, around applying your gifts, your God-given gifts, your skills, to doing something impactful, in whatever way that is, in whether, as you mentioned, some of their careers, whatever that career is, and whether they are a lawyer or a public servant, but having a mentality of making. It sounds, as we it sounds cheesy, but making the world a better place, and it needs to be a better place, and we need to make it a better place.
Do you think, though, something needs to change, especially party politics across the continent, in order to prep more young people into coming into the political spheres? People who are coming, climbing the ladder within these political parties, not because of they know who is who and they get to do and support the bosses who do those things. Do you think that needs to change, and if so, how?
I mean, the work of emerging public leaders focuses on the non-elected, because we feel civil service is, again, that secret sauce that's sometimes not always invested in. Our sister organisation with the same founder as our co-founder, former President Sirleaf, the EJS Centre, they support and encourage women, only women, in more of the political space and elected space. And so that's just one example of more that can happen, whereby there are programs that will help and support women or other, and young people to play their part in both the political but also the civil service. And again, we need ethical leaders in all areas.
Interesting. Thank you so much.